Hi, and welcome to Gin with Gwyn. I'm Oliver Gwyn, and this is where we talk about marketing, data, and philosophy. This week, we are continuing on from last week's theme of segmentation or targeting, and we're talking about activation, why that is difficult. Now, for my purposes today, activation refers specifically to how do you make the list of customers, how do you keep them up to date, and the doing, actually sending the emails to those people or sending the text or whatever it might be. I'm not referring to activating the segment internally as in, here's our segment's people and this is what they mean and this is who we're targeting and all of that kind of stuff. So what is the problem? The first problem is that people tend to start their segmentation strategy or their targeting strategy inside of a CRM or an ERP or sometimes even some sort of customer service portal. And these tools might have dynamic lists, often with some sort of rules-based interface in there that says Oliver is this kind of person, so he goes on this list and he has done X, Y, and Z, which means that we can then put him in another list of cohorts of hot, cold, this kind of thing. But the way in which you can create this list is normally quite simplistic. It tends to be around demographic lines or firmographics if you're a B2B. It's not very robust in terms of attitudinal things. And although there's some behavior in there, it can be quite simplistic. And what that means is that people tend to sit in broader categories. The other problem is because you're very reliant on your CRM data. If that's not good, if it's very messy, if it's out of date, then your segmentation will also be there, which means a higher risk of people getting the wrong messaging. For example, if you have a B2B company, Emily has got a new job at a much bigger company, but she is currently sitting in your startup segmentation because the only way to update their records is a salesperson going and checking her records and then manually updating them. She's getting the wrong messaging in the in-between time because there's no automated process there. So the main problems there are, one is it's too simple. Two, it's very reliant on manual updates within the CRM, which is prone to human error. It's prone to people miscategorizing things. It's prone to, a salesperson going, oh, this person's very warm actually, because it helps them meet their sales target. And so it's only as good as the data in there. The advantages are, though, that you can then do the doing in there typically. Most CRM systems these days, they have an email function, they have a text function, they have a way of actually doing the messaging, which is great. But because those segments aren't robust enough, companies turn to other ways in which to look at segmenting their audience. That might be with a CDP, might be with the data within their data warehouse and modeling that data, which is what I typically would advise. It might be in a tool like SPSS, so specifically made for sort of a lot of data modeling, which might be more complex and more robust, and it does a lot of those things not in almost real time, and it does them in a more robust way. But then you have the problem of activation. So you have these lists and you have your cohorts and all of that good stuff, but you're still having to download those lists and then upload them to your tools on a regular basis. If somebody forgets to do that, your list is out of date. It's only as good as the point of which you download that list. And so your activation always has problems, and sometimes those tools that are more robust, because what they have done is more complex than what is available in the CRM. Those two things don't quite match up perfectly, and so you have a mismatch there, which is really quite annoying and quite a challenge to a lot of companies. And so what do you do there? Well, you have to think about a way in which that you can do robust modeling and then still activate that, as in be able to send those to your marketing tools, your email tools, whatever it might be. The other problem I wanted to talk a little bit about is behavior. So companies, they do this behavioral segmentation, and it might be, for example, I go to your website and you have a flag that says, Oliver's been to your website 10 times this week. He must be high intent. Let's send him a sales email. And typically what I find is that the threshold for this activity is really, really too low. Now, my opinion on this might change. So companies sort of go, oh, he's been to the website twice in 1 week. Great. He's definitely interested in sales. And that's not always the case. Quite often people are still in that information phase, but because you're looking at things through rose tinted glasses, because you're hoping that they want to be interested in you, you set that bar quite low. And so that means that a lot of action and a lot of spend and a lot of time is done based on not a lot of interest and intent signs from your customer base. The other problem is that there's often an automated flow associated with this activity. And I find that to be one of the most dangerous things in sort of marketing and communications. Uh, because, as I said, everybody's behavior is so unique to them. What is true of one person does not tend to be true of another. And one person's buyer intent or whatever it might be, churn intent, is not the same as somebody else's. And so if you are automating this great big flow on the back of intent, it can be very dangerous. Coming back to my example where in 1 week I visited your website 10 times. Let's say there's two people who did that. One of them looked at your website 10 times in one day, and one did a couple of times over a week. The person who did a couple of times over a week is a lot better prospect than the person who did 1 day, 1 week, because probably they did their research and they found that you're not the company for them. And so it's thinking about things like that and the rules that is really, really difficult. And that's why I most often advise that you create a flag that says this person's looked at your website 10 times in 1 week. And then a person, where possible, reviews that, has a quick look at the person and where they sit and how their LTV or predicted LTV would be. And then they decide, okay, this person should go onto this workflow. And there's only so many workflows that they can choose from. So it's quite an easy choice. But you are, instead of them reviewing 1,000 people, they are only reviewing 10, say this week. And they are choosing manually to put them onto those automated workflows, as opposed to it all happening automatically. And then people get onto the wrong communication, you turn people off, because once people are turned off, it's very, very difficult to get them back. And the overriding problem with all of this sort of behavioral segmentation or behavior-led workflows is just that companies think about things in this weird way that does not reflect reality. It's very much thought of from their point of view. The classic one is, somebody has something in the cart, must be high intent, they're definitely going to buy this thing. I'm going to send them a discount, or I'm going to send them an offer. Well, these days, a lot of people know that if they put something in the cart and they don't buy it, they're going to get that discount. And so that behavior has changed. And so you end up self-cannibalizing your own profit margin because you've decided that something is high intent. It could be that somebody is putting something in there just so that they remember it for later. They don't want to have a saved list. They don't want to create an account. They just want to remember that thing for later. And so when you only think about things from a company point of view, hey, people are coming onto our website and looking at our services pages, they must be interested in our services. Well, not necessarily. And so when you think about behavior only from a company point of view and not reflected on the way that people really react, if you don't do that user testing, if you don't do that market research, then the behavior tracking will always be a little bit one-sided. And so how do we solve these problems? With the behavior problem, I really advise doing your first party research, doing recorded interviews with people, setting people tasks and recording it and see how they really act in real life, going out and talking to your customers about how they react. Now, there'll always be a grayness in the truth. People don't always tell you the answer. I have seen somebody who I've watched them do an action. They've seen a video that I had happened to create, and then they went onto that website. And when I said, "Oh, how did you find out about this company?" They said, "Oh, somebody told me about it." I was like, "I just saw you watch that video I made. I know that's not true." And so there's always a little bit of a disconnect there, but it gets you more of an answer, and it helps illuminate the real way in which people are using your products, your services, visiting your website, interacting with your marketing. And so that is absolutely crucial. And to draw out those customer journeys in a more realistic way that allows you to tag people at a sort of macro level, which helps marketing people because they're affecting people en masse, but also a micro level, which helps your sales team because they're affecting people in a granular way. And the second thing is, how do you do that doing? How do you have this sort of robust model and then you actually feed it back to your email tools or whatever it might be without just exporting a list and then output? And so if you're only thinking about things from a company point of view, there'll always be a disconnect with you and your customers. How do you bridge that gap? Well, you need to do first party research. You need to do recorded sessions in which people visit your website. You need to do larger market research as to understand and hear their stories and understand the category led information that people are thinking about. And you need to draw things out in a way that doesn't always necessarily suit your company, but is broad enough so that your marketing teams who can understand it at a macro level, because that's where they can affect things. And so it's better to have 3 or 4 stages when understanding the customer journey. And your sales team need to understand things at a micro level because they're affecting things on a very granular one-to-one basis. And so when it comes to behavior, you need to bridge that gap in terms of understanding with more research. And then you need to categorize it in a way that is suitable to the data that you've got today, because first party data is your most valuable asset. It's no good if you do that research and you decide, hey, it'd be useful to know what the income is of our customers, and you don't have that data. Okay, well, don't try and get that data because your customer's going to give you that. Hey, how much do you earn? I just want to know. No, I don't want to tell you that. But you know how much they're spending with you. So always start with the data that you've always got in terms of behaviors, because that's always a good first sign. And then in terms of the activation, so you figure out this stuff about behavior, you figure out your segments and your cohorts within it. How do you actually do the doing? How do you bridge the gap between having something that's very robust and then putting it into these tools where you're actually sending the email where they can't always handle that more robust data? Well, the thing that I wish I knew before, and it's only existed maybe for a couple of years, is this thing called reverse ETL. So what reverse ETL does is you takes modeled data, so this robust, modeled, updated, daily, hourly, real time if you need it, data, and then it sends them into the tools and applications which your teams are already using. So it lowers the gap because they're not having to learn a new tool, they're not having to go into a dashboard, they're not having to download a list, they're not having to re-upload that list, and they're not having this mismatch between things because it's sending that model data directly into those tools. And the advantage with this is that you can then create things like flags for churn, LTV predictions, all of this good stuff. You can dynamically segment, and you can do it no matter how many different tools that you're currently using. You're not having to worry that, hey, this robust modeling doesn't quite work with my CRM and my CRM only lets me do X, Y, and Z. You don't have to worry about that. If you're using 5 different tools for marketing, one for emails, one for SMS, whatever it might be, you can use a reverse ETL tool like Census to do all of that stuff. And so it helps to bridge that gap. So the problem that we come back to about activation is, number one, from a company point of view, you have to really think carefully about your strategy and the way in which your customers interact with you. And I always advise start with some sort of category-led segments and cohorts within them. Then you have to think about the behavior of those customers in those different segments and the different messaging for them in a realistic way that is both simple enough for marketing to understand, but granular enough for sales to understand. And then you have to think about, how am I actually going to feedback this information where I'm dealing with thousands of people? It's no good. They have to manually look through scrolls and scrolls of data. So can I create flags that tell them when somebody's going to churn, when somebody's going to LTV, when somebody's likely to buy? And can I also give them another flag that says, hey, Oliver's more likely to answer an email than he is to answer a call, so send him an email. How can I be smart about the answers that I give those real people so that their time is limited and they're more likely to be successful? And make sure that there is a little bit of a barrier between humans and automation so that people don't accidentally get miscategorized based on the bad data that you might have. And so that is my advice on how to bridge the gap with activation and robust segmentation. Thanks very much for watching, and join me next Sunday for another edition of Gin with Gwyn.